Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into Tipping Point. I am Chris Cochran. Today on Tipping Point, we are discussing mass incarceration as it applies to the youth in America. Now, youth incarceration is being exacerbated by the zero-tolerance policies originally meant to keep our schools safe. As we can see from examples of Sandy Hook, Columbine, and Blacksburg, Virginia, schools in our country have taken extreme measures to avoid the appearance of terrorism, crime, and gun violence by implementing and designing zero-tolerance policies to dissuade youth from crime, both minuscule, like threats and ditching class, to the extreme, such as gun violence, drug possession, and bomb threats. Zero tolerance only leads to a greater amount of students getting suspended and expelled, and is one of the chief reasons for the escalation of mass incarceration in this country. Zero tolerance is the act of punishing all criminal or unacceptable behavior severely, even if it's not very serious. Now, zero tolerance policy is a school or district policy that mandates predetermined consequences or punishments for specific offenses that are intended to be applied regardless of the seriousness of the behavior, mitigating circumstances or situational context. Now, the school to prison pipeline is the process in which students and youth make errors and small crimes in school, becoming suspended and expelled, forcing them out onto the street to act out, leading to more serious crimes and ultimately leading them into prison. Zero tolerance policies, originally meant as a deterrent to youth crime and delinquency, are no longer effective, and furthermore results in a greater increase of mass incarceration in this country. Now, more than 6,500 of California's 130,000 inmates committed crimes under the age of 18. In an effort to find some solutions and resolve, school districts must act swiftly to repeal zero tolerance and the following 4 steps. To increase the use of positive behavior interventions and supports by compiling annual reports on the total number of disciplinary actions that punish and push students out of the classroom based on gender, race, and ability. Number 2, create agreements with police departments and court systems to limit arrests in schools and the use of restraints such as mace and handcuffs. Number 3, provide simple explanations of infractions and prescribed responses in the Student Code of Conduct to ensure fairness. Number 3, create appropriate limits on the use of law enforcement in public schools. And lastly, to train teachers on the use of positive behavior supports for at-risk students. Now, joining us on the program today on Tipping Point, we have a couple guests. First is Angela. Let's welcome Angela, a teacher from California, who will be talking about her students and the problems with zero tolerance. Good morning, Angela. How are you today?
Hi there, Chris. As a teacher, I believe zero tolerance in most cases is punishing students too harshly. Students should be clearly informed on what punishments will fit a specific crime or misdeed. We must simply take the guessing game out of the system and eliminate bias based on race, gender, and socioeconomic status. School districts must create equal playing field to provide greater consistency. A few examples at the school I teach at. Bryson pointed his finger like a gun at a classmate and in a flash was hit with a 5-day suspension. The principal singled out Bryson, the only African American in his grade, for punishment, patting him down and scanning his 6th grader's frame with a metal detector. He was placed in an alternative program for bad students, serving 2 days of his sentence until his mother brought in the NAACP. Bryson had been a straight A student, but now that has changed. Also, there is Daniel, who remarked that he wished the school would burn down and take the principal with it. His words were overheard and translated to said principal that Daniel had gasoline and was recruiting a gang to burn down the school. Without notifying Daniel or his parents, the principal brought in the police to investigate Daniel's comments. 2 weeks later, Daniel was yanked out of the math class and interrogated by an officer who read him his Miranda rights. So as we can see, zero tolerance is failing our students, and it is in desperate need of repealing. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Cochran.
Wow, thank you, Angela, for that perspective. It does seem sort of silly when you think of those kids' intention. Not ever meant to be a serious threat, but taken way out of context and pursued like adult terrorists. That's ridiculous. We're going to go live now where Nolan is standing by, a journalist for the LA Times, with some valuable thoughts as well on the topic of zero tolerance and the school-to-prison pipeline. Nolan?
Thank you, Chris, and hello. The important point is that zero tolerance makes no sense. It leads to an increase of crime specifically within the inner cities and within ethnic communities. A variety of mechanisms weaken the resistance of those communities most harmed by mass incarceration. Harsh crime policies entrenched economic inequality, which fed back into imprisonment. Suburbanization put a wide gap between voters who elected aggressive prosecutors and the inner city populations that felt their wrath. Growing state and federal intervention in crime control privileged groups that could organize at those levels of government, muting neighborhood groups that oppose the punitive turn. America's prison binge led to the criminalization of African Americans and disenfranchised citizens en masse through its legal and psychological effects. Mass incarceration thus reinforced the racial stereotypes that originally nurtured it and politically demobilized the communities most inclined to resist it. To some analysts, all these developments were driven by even deeper forces that also tend to be self-reinforcing. A logic of racial domination, a late modern culture of control, a reassertion of state power in the face of neoliberal retrenchment, or a uniquely American bent for harsh justice. Thank you, Chris, for your time.
Now, as a final thought on Tipping Point today, I have a couple points to make. The first one, cutting down the school-to-prison pipeline has everything to do with limiting suspensions, in my opinion. When there are fewer children that are suspended or expelled, this will lead to lesser problems down the road. There is a dramatic increase of school suspensions in the last 10 years. Suspensions are often the first step on a path of school failure and exclusion that lead many away from school and out onto the street, where they will find trouble and surely be led down the path to the juvenile justice system. Second, I believe school districts must act swiftly to repeal zero tolerance and increase the use of positive behavior interventions and supports. But as we've shown today, zero tolerance was designed to put systems in place so that parents and students will feel safe and secure at school, but has ultimately failed the youth of today. Third, zero tolerance policies used inappropriately exacerbate the challenges of early adolescence and the potential mismatch between the adolescent's developmental stage and the structure of secondary schools. Point is, friends, God gives us grace for all of us, for both our sins of past and present. So students should be treated this way too. Now, youth feel overwhelmed and unloved because of their shortcomings. Even mature Christians struggle with understanding and accepting God's grace because we're surrounded by anti-grace messages from the time we're young. Thank you for tuning in to Tipping Point. I'm Chris Cochran saying good night and God bless.